2, 3. Got it. Oh.
The radical, fundamental principles of freedom, rational self-interest, and individual rights. This is the Yaron Brook Show.
All right, everybody, welcome to Yaron Brook Show on this Sunday night, Sunday before Ocon. Hopefully some of you are coming to Ocon. It's going to be a blast. Austin, Texas, hotbed, I guess, of COVID right now, but we'll be soon overtaken by objectivism. So objectivists, anyway. So it should be interesting. All right, today we've got our $100 supporter hangout, and we've got a few of the supporters here with me. We'll be taking their questions. We'll start off with taking their questions in a couple of minutes. I did want to say a few things about Afghanistan before we get rolling, just because it's so in the news, and I haven't had a show in a few days, so just thought of bring you up to speed and just some thoughts about just the insanity of what is kind of unfolding over there. Of course, the complete incompetence of the U.S. government and military is on display for the world to see. The long lines outside the airport. The Taliban is actually helping by organizing the lines and helping bring order and I guess peace to it, while I guess hunting down people that they would like to assassinate and beating up women who they find offensive, and they're doing that particularly outside of Kabul, because they know that in Kabul there's a lot of press, and they're trying to present this image to the world that it's a different Taliban. They're now more moderate. They're now nice guys. Why are they doing that? Because Afghanistan is a dirt poor country with no sources of income, and they're hoping to convince the Americans and everybody else to give them foreign aid. And I'm sure there's already negotiations in the background about, hey, let us fly out of here and we'll give you X billions of dollars. There's no doubt in my mind that is going on to some extent or another. The Taliban, when it came to power in 1996, played the same game, pretended to be moderate, pretended to be friendly, pretended to try to get the world on their side, but very quickly reverted to their true nature, which is religious fanatics, complete totalitarians when it comes to religion. And I expect the same thing will happen here. So we're seeing desperate people try to get out of Afghanistan. The Turks are have got this wall now built on their border with Iran, because they're expecting a massive exodus from Afghanistan through Iran to try to get into Western Europe. I think many of the countries surrounding Afghanistan are beefing up border security to try to prevent the Afghans from escaping the brutality of the Taliban. And of course, everybody's trying to get to the airport to get out of there. And I was wondering, so the Air Force can't fly enough airplanes in and out of there. There's one, what do you call it? One track, right? One airplane can take off, one airplane can land at a time. It's a small airport. And, you've got massive numbers of people. You can only fit 400, 600 people in an airplane. We've got 15,000 Americans still in Afghanistan. Many of them not in Kabul, so who knows how they're going to get them. The military is not venturing into Kabul, maybe special ops are, but not as a strategy to bring people out, at least not that we know of. So it's really completely dependent on the cooperation of the Taliban, which is pretty pathetic and weak. And then I remembered that just a couple of months ago, I think it was a couple of months ago, like the US in the middle of the night sneaked out and evacuated the Bagram airport. And the commander of the airport, an Afghan general, showed up in the morning and the Americans were gone. And he was completely surprised. He had no idea. So I wonder if they kept the Bagram airport, would that have any impact on what's going on right now? So I did a little Google map thing. And the Bagram airport is about, 50, 60 miles or no, 50, 60 kilometers from Kabul. So yeah, it would have made a huge difference. You could have secured a passage and convoys of people, and you would have had two airports running. But nobody was thinking. No strategic planning. And as much as Biden here is at fault, and I mean, it's ridiculous what Biden has done, you've got to blame the military here. Where's the military intelligence? Where's the thinking, the strategy, the putting forces at work, putting forces thinking out how you would evacuate people, what you need, what resources you need, what capacities you need? None of that happened in Afghanistan. And arguably, you could extrapolate that to the whole period in Afghanistan going back to 2001. If this is the quality of our military, of intelligence, of planning, of strategy, unless it's deteriorated dramatically in the last few years, it's not surprising we got to where we are today, because this has been the case really from the beginning of the operation. And it's tragic and sad to see the American military in this state. This is not an issue of funding. This is not an issue of training. This is an issue of thinking, and ultimately it's an issue of philosophy, and it's an issue of application of reason and self-interest to the problems we faced, both of which obviously are not being taught at West Point. And I visited West Point with Leonard Peikoff years and years ago. And yeah, I mean, it's tragedy what's going on at West Point and what's actually being taught there. True 20 years ago, even more true today. So just horrific pictures coming out, and real tragedy. Trump did have a rally today. I thought I'd mention Trump's rally in Alabama, where he kind of said, with this tone of deep respect, says, these Taliban, they're really good negotiators and they're really fierce fighters, and kind of almost like, yeah, those are men like me, they're cool, right? It was just disgusting and terrible. But that was today in Alabama. It was also funny because he did at some point say to the crowd that they should get vaccinated. And it's the only thing he said throughout the whole thing, where he literally got booed by his own people. That is pretty unusual that Trump supporters will boo him. But about the vaccines, that's where we are in America. They're willing even to boo Trump. I mean, that supersedes Trump. It supersedes anything. They're the anti-vaccination mentality. All right. So, it's going to be a long time before America recovers from this, just like it took a long time to recover from Vietnam. It took Ronald Reagan, I think, for us to recover from Vietnam. It's going to take somebody even better than Ronald Reagan to recover from this, because we're deeper in the hole now. Let's hope there's somebody out there in the wings who is capable of getting us out of this mess. I don't see who it is, but hopefully they're out there. I don't think anybody saw Ronald Reagan in the early 1970s. Of course, famously, Ayn Rand objected even to Reagan. So, okay, so today's a Q&A. We'll start with our panel of supporters. Then I will do Super Chat. We still have our usual goals in the Super Chat, so please consider asking questions. The $20 questions will get priority. Thank you, OMG Puppies, for the Super Chat question, and that's a $20 one. So feel free to jump in with any questions on any topics, anything in the news, out of the news, philosophy related, Ocon related, anything you feel like. All right, I'm going to start with Matt.
Well, this isn't the question I had prepared, but in your opening remarks, you mentioned West Point, and I don't know if I've brought it up before, but I'm a West Point graduate. Was there did something particular? I mean, that was 10 years ago, that the last time I was there. So I don't know. I was there from 2006 to 2010, and the people when I was there, if we were unchained and given a mission, my peers, we could have accomplished anything. I think in the world, or I can't imagine the people I know there would not accept defeat and could get anything done. But I wouldn't say that about senior leadership who are closer to politicians than they are war fighters or patriots. So, but did something happen recently to to draw that West Point to your attention?
Well, I mean, as I said, I was at West Point with Leonard Peikoff. Wow. It was probably before you were there. So I was probably there in the mid 2000s, just after 9/11 at some point. And he was giving a talk about what was going on in the Middle East, about the post 9/11. And while the reception from the cadets, I think, was very positive, the reception from the professors was awful. It was just terrible. And generally, the attitude of the professors, and looking at least in the philosophy department, what they were teaching, was kind of horrifying. The guy that I landed up spending most of my time critiquing in Just War Theory when I wrote my essay on Just War Theory was Michael Walzer, who is of course teaches at West Point, and he teaches Just War Theory at West Point, and it is the theory that dominates kind of the ethics of war, or the attitude towards war. And it's true that you're right. The cadets are first class, and they come in amazingly motivated, and they have the basic skills to do anything. But I do think they're undermined, and I've talked to cadets coming out of there that they're undermined in their thinking about what is possible. That is the scope of what they think they could do, because that scope is narrowed by things like Just War Theory and by things that are taught in the philosophy department over there. I think the scope is also narrowed by the fact that, as you said, generals, the way you make yourself up in the military, I found this to be true in the Israeli military as well, is not based necessarily on ability and skill and the smartest. And those people typically leave because they identify pretty quickly that they could do great in the civilian sector, and they can make a lot of money, and they can be successful because they've got those skill set that can be applied to business. The ones who stay in Israel, at least, were often the people who are afraid to go into the civilian world because they didn't know. I mean, the military gives you a path, and it protects you, and and if you do the right things, you get advanced, and it's just safe. It's a very safe career. And so a lot of the military land up being people who are afraid of civilian life, in Israel at least. And here I think people who also are comfortable dealing with the political aspects of the military, that is, dealing with other senior leaders, dealing with the conflicts within the military, dealing with the conflicts between different levels, between different branches, and then of course the conflicts with the issues with the civilian staff at the Pentagon or the Department of Defense, and of course in the White House. So as the generals as you go up in rank, I tend to lose more and more respect for the people involved. Everything I've read about the generals of the last 20 years, there's nobody who stands out to me as somebody who I have a deep respect to. And then when I look at the planning, when I look at the public face of these wars, and the number of soldiers like you who were put in harm's way in my view, for no reason, with no goal, with no strategy, with no thought, that's the sense. Now, the thing that came up recently was that they're now studying critical race theory at West Point. That's part of the curriculum. At least, and again, probably the philosophy department, or probably maybe the English, or I don't know. I wouldn't know exactly how West Point is structured. So, and Miley, the chief of the Joint Chiefs, was defending that in front of Congress. Now, he's defending it as know thy enemy, but knowing the professors who teach, I'm not sure that's the only reason they're teaching it, right? I'm not sure that's the only way. So yeah, I don't think. I mean, I know people like to go after Miley right now because of his testimony, because Tucker Carlson made a big deal out of it and went after him. But I haven't. I mean, I haven't been impressed by any of them. By any of them, including Colin Powell. The last general I think I was impressed by was Desert Storm. What was his name? Schwartz.
Norman Schwarzkopf. Stormin' Norman.
Yeah, Storming Norman. He struck me as a real tough guy, and as the kind of general who you'd want on your side. And if you think about the planning and the execution of Desert Storm, where it basically ended in the first couple of days, it was done, and we suffered most of our casualties actually from friendly fire, sadly. But that's the kind of general I want on my side. That just takes out the enemy in day one, and then you just it's all over by then. And there's no reason that we can't do that in almost every assignment, given the firepower we have on our side, given the quality of the people on the boots on the ground that we have. Nobody should be able to withstand what we us for very long, and it's only because we don't actually allow that to happen. Somebody's asking, what about General Patton? Unfortunately, General Patton is a long gone. General Patton is one of my heroes, although he was wacky. I mean, he was a little crazy. But from a military strategist, General Patton was a genius. I wish General Patton had led the invasion of Europe instead of Eisenhower. I think if he had, we would have ended that war about a year earlier, probably saved the lives of several million people, at least 1 million in the concentration camps, but probably more than that. We would have saved Eastern Europe from the Soviet Union, because we would have gotten there so much earlier. I mean, so much of history would be different if FDR had the balls to make and the general staff had supported this to make Patton the guy in charge of the invasion of Europe. Instead, all they used Patton for when they invaded Europe was a decoy. And the only reason they could use him as a decoy is because the Germans were so afraid of Patton, right? They weren't afraid of Eisenhower. They were really petrified of Patton. So the decoy kind of worked as a consequence. But yeah, one of the great, I think, tragedies. MacArthur was another pretty amazing general, and it's why Truman had to get rid of him. Because Truman didn't want to win the war in Korea. And so he had to get rid of MacArthur, who was actually going to drive for victory. Plus, MacArthur might have run for president. And then Truman might not have won. Then we might not have gotten Eisenhower as president, which again would have changed history quite a bit. Although I'm not sure what kind of a president MacArthur would have made. Hard to tell. Anyway, that's my long, short answer. Thanks, Matt.
Yeah.
Jennifer.
Have you ever heard someone say that when you have rights and when in a society, if your rights are recognized, that it comes with responsibilities? And I always wonder what they mean by that. If they mean, it's like they're saying, well, we'll allow you to be free, but you have to pay this price or something.
Yeah, it's you have to earn it. You have to earn the right, in a sense. It's not yours. That's not just a function of government to protect them. It's the only reason to have a government. It's you have to earn those rights, and you have to pay for them, in a sense, and you have to live up. Now, it's true in a sense you have to live up to them, but that's a personal responsibility. And you have to live up to your moral standards. You have to live up to your morality, but the sense in which they mean it is, well, if we're going to protect your rights, you have to behave the way we expect you to behave, and you have to pay your taxes, and you have to do these things. And it's usually conservatives who say that, and it's usually because, I mean, the fact is the concept of rights is hard for them, because where does it come from? How do you get these rights? It's kind of from God, but how do you defend that? They feel uncomfortable about the idea of rights. They know it's the right thing, and they know the founders were very strong on rights, but they don't completely understand what to do with it. and how to defend it. And they also are very much about respect. They certainly have a certain sense of respect for the state. And they want you to have that respect for the state. And that comes through in this concept of responsibilities. And I always tell them, no, you don't have any responsibilities to the state. The state is your servant.
It kind of reminds me of the mafia, like we won't blow you up if you pay us our cut or whatever, we'll leave you alone. That's what it reminds me of.
Protect you, but protection money, protection money. Yeah, there's a term in Hebrew called protectia, which obviously comes from protection and protection money. And protectia means, getting stuff because of your status. It's the true meaning of privilege, right? But it's who you know rather than who you are. It's cutting in line. It's because of who you know is the term in Hebrew. So protection money. All right, David.
Okay, I have a piece of advice question for you, and hopefully I'm going to be able to ask this of Amesh Adala next week at Ocon. But my question is, my wife and I are both vaccinated. I have a 12-year-old. He'll be 13 next Thursday. He's 13. He's healthy. He hasn't had COVID as far as I know. My wife and I are struggling with, the 12 is the cutoff. You can vaccinate kids if they're 12 or older. And we're struggling with the decision on whether to vaccinate him or not. I wonder if you had any thoughts on that.
Man. I mean, I would not, because I just don't see the point. On the other hand, it's a low cost. That is it's not like vaccination. The likelihood the vaccines are hurting him is very high. But COVID is not an issue for 13-year-olds, as far as I can tell, to the best of my knowledge. Even the Delta variant, while it looks like it's more likely that they get the Delta variant, and maybe that's because they're not vaccinated, and in a sense, the virus has nowhere to go but to the non-vaccinated. So he might get it, but so what? For most kids, it's a non-event if they get it, or for overwhelming majority of kids, it's a non-event to get it. The only reason to get him vaccinated would be if he's in contact with people who are have comorbidities, who are susceptible to COVID, who could really, like if you guys weren't vaccinated for whatever reason, then it would be good for him to get vaccinated, because the vaccine, while he could still get it and transmit it, it lowers the probability of both, right? But if you're vaccinated, he's not interacting with grandparents, let's say, who are not vaccinated. You don't have friends who might be obese or have heart disease or lung disease that are not vaccinated. If he's pretty much in a world where people are vaccinated, the adults in the world around him are all vaccinated, I just don't see why, other than the school might require it, or they might not require it because it might be difficult depending on the state in which you are, but they might make it very difficult for you if he is not vaccinated. And then I'd say the cost of getting vaccinated is not that high because they're very low risk. So it might be at some point the balance tilts towards getting vaccinated.
It sounds like you're like me, that it's not a definite yes or no either way. It's somewhere in the middle, and we're leaning, well, obviously he's 12, but we haven't vaccinated him yet. So we're agreeing with you so far.
Yeah, and I would wait to see how this develops. I mean, look, if the data comes back, and this is not a philosophical issue, right? This is a data-driven scientific issue. If the data comes back and says the Delta variant looks like it's much more bad, much worse for children, or if it turns out there's a new variant that's bad for children, absolutely I would get vaccinated. So it really is data-driven, and I will be interested to see what Amos says. So far, the percent of children that have died from COVID is basically zero. it's not, but it could be, it's a rounding error. And hospitalizations are up. But as relative to the previous rounds, but that could just be because that's where the virus is going and more kids are getting it. So we'll see. And then, we'll see from there. I think the way people are mentioning that the VARS data is rather enlightening. The VARS data is easily misinterpreted, and is being misinterpreted on a major level, and is very, very dangerous to go for the VARS and not, and you have to know what you're actually looking at when you're looking at VARS. So be wary of how people, VARS is the post-vaccine kind of where people write in what kind of side effects, illnesses they got from the vaccine. Be very, very wary of how you use that tool. It's not easy to interpret. Again, stats, data. I've said this many, many times. Very easy to manipulate. Very hard to understand often. And you better know what you're doing. Darius.
Thanks, Yaron. You've said a number of times, excuse me, in the past, that your delineation of foreign policy and how to categorize countries. I believe you said that, number one, you have allies who you should trade and do diplomacy with. And then on the other extreme, I'll call it number three, you have enemies who you should do neither with, neither trade nor diplomacy. And then in the middle, group two, I think you said they're neither allies or enemies. It's okay to trade with them. You should not do diplomacy with them. Assuming I got that right, could you just define what's the right way to determine a country as an ally and what's the right way to determine one as an enemy?
I mean, sure. I mean, at the end, this is a whole field of study that somebody needs to do. So I can give you kind of the outline and my thoughts, but it's just my thoughts. I'm not an expert on this, but there is a whole field of thinking about foreign policy and how you would do it and what it would imply. I would say an enemy is a state that constitutes a real threat, a real threat, danger to the individual rights of your country. So to the individual rights of Americans. So it's a country that is actively deploying some mechanism, whether it's terrorism or missiles or other kind of threatening technologies, deploying them actively against you, right? And if you let your guard down, you have reasonable reason to believe that they will kill Americans and destroy American property. So countries that actively support terrorism, countries that are actively developing technology that's aimed at you, particularly if they tell you it's aimed at you, countries that have a history and that is not being repudiated of going after Americans. I actually think that probably only, of actual countries in the world, there are, 2.5 enemies of the United States today. I'd say the two are Iran and North Korea. I would consider Saudi Arabia the half. I'd have to have a lot more intelligence information to know how much are they still funding terrorism? Has that changed? To what extent are they exporting terrorism? And then you might have to look at places like Qatar, Kuwait, and to see what extent are they funding people like ISIS and Al-Qaeda. And to the extent they are funding those places, it's a terrorist country, an enemy. To the extent that they're not, it's not. I don't know. Turkey's not. Again, it's not an ally, but it's not an enemy. It's not actively engaging in hostilities towards the U.S. Afghanistan certainly was, maybe is again with the Taliban. So maybe that's 3. Maybe Afghanistan joins. And certainly Pakistan is borderline. You've got to watch them because clearly they're supporting the Taliban. Clearly they're supporting our enemies here and there. So you've got to really watch them. I don't consider Russia an enemy. The Russians wouldn't dare. They could become one pretty quickly, but right now They're not trying to kill Americans. They're not trying to undermine American security. Now, let me put one caveat on all of this. If you can prove that the Russians or Chinese are intentionally and on a significant scale hacking U.S. servers, particularly Defense Department services, government servers, but also stealing material from companies on scale, that would tilt them into enemy territory. I mean, but you would have to have the balls to call it. And so far, people have avoided it. So it could be that I would tilt Russia and China into that. But I think once they knew that they would be tilted in that direction, they would stop doing it. That's part of the issue. Part of the issue is if you actually take a stand and protect it, the bad guys go away. The bad guys don't want to mess with you because they're afraid, as they should be from a proper foreign policy. So, but the enemy is that dedication. And again, you'd have to spend the time, the effort to figure out country by country who is what and who is doing what, right? Ally would have to be a free country, a country that's essentially free, that essentially shares your values, and that views freedom and individual rights to the extent that they are recognized in the world today as the proper thing to be defending, right? So today, I would say who are allies? Well, it's Western Europe, some of Eastern Europe. It's countries like Israel. It's countries like Australia, New Zealand, Japan, South Korea. I'm sure I'm missing some, but those would be the key allies of the United States, right?
Canada?
Oh, certainly Canada, even Mexico, even much of Latin America. Maybe not all of Latin America, but much of Latin America. The non-Marxist parts of Latin America, which are, I think, dwindling with the recent election of a Marxist as president of Peru. That would, I think, again, a lot more thinking needs to be dedicated to this, a lot more concrete evaluating, study, research would have to go into a fully fledged theory of that. But I think in broad senses, those are the categories, and that's the sense in which somebody's an ally or somebody's an ally. So most of the world falls in the middle. Like I don't know, there are 270 countries in the world. Like there are probably 50 allies, maybe, and half a dozen enemies, and everybody else is kind of in the middle.
Is there a name for that middle group?
I don't have one. I'm open to
Frenemies?
suggestions.
Frenemies?
Frenemies. Probably not, but something that captures that.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, let's do a couple of these $20 questions. OMG Puppy says, after the World Trade Center attack, we could have destroyed the terrorist bases, shock and all, and then left. I mean, we could have done more. We could have destroyed the terrorist bases. We could have killed the entire leadership of the Taliban. They were all in the crosshair. We had them. We could have, destroyed their capabilities to rebuild. We could have gone after the madrasas in Pakistan. We could have destroyed every remnant of Islamic totalitarianism in the Middle East, including, Islamic Jihad and Hamas and Hezbollah. And we could have identified them all as the enemies and given a green light to Israel and to our allies all over the Middle East to destroy these factions. There was a lot that could have been done after 9/11. And of course, we could have gone to Iran, which is the hotbed of this, but there was a lot that could have been done after 9/11 and was not, that would have allowed us to walk away having destroyed our enemies and being pretty confident that they would leave us alone for a long, long, long time, because they would be licking their wounds for a long, long, long time. Let's see, Theme Master says, after a busy day, when we sit down and daydream for a few minutes, is that the subconscious integrating what has happened during the day? I mean, it might be. It might be. It depends on what your daydreams are. It could be that you are the subconscious is starting to plan the next day. It could be that it's just an escape from whatever the stresses of the day have been or so it depends. It depends on the specific nature of the daydream. I don't have that experience of sitting down and where my subconscious is feeding me stuff from what's happened during the day. Usually and I talked about this last show, I think, usually my subconscious is already starting to feed me all the things I need to do to plan for the next day. So it really depends. But the subconscious is integrating. The question is its orientation backwards to understand what's happened, or forward to plan or to prepare you for what's next? Or is it like sometime when you're really exhausted, is it just to rest you up? All right. OMG Puppy says, let's see. Oh, Ragnar says, let me do Ragnar first. Ragnar says, has anyone invited Joe Rogan to come hang out at OCON? This would allow him an opportunity to get some perspective and come to his own real conclusions, as opposed to the negative impressions he has expressed, primarily coming from others. I sent him a tweet. I didn't invite him to the conference, but I could. That's a good idea. I'll invite Joe Rogan to the conference. I have invited Lex Friedman. I'm hoping he'll come. He did express interest in coming, so I'm hoping Lex will come to OCON, or at least attend a little bit of OCON, which will be a lot of fun if he does. But I haven't. I invited. I told Joe Rogan I was going to be in Austin, and invited him to invite me to do an interview, but that he hasn't responded. Okay, OMG Puppy says Miley makes me think of a PowerPoint general. Maybe. I mean, I don't know. I don't have enough of a sense yet of Miley. Bedola says, I have a young child and discovered objective is when he was born. I'm struggling to deal with my anxiety and anger as people seem more of a threat than beforehand. As a parent, how do you go along without being a Keating? Wow. So first, I'd recommend a show I did a few weeks ago with a couple of other young parents, very thoughtful, who've given a lot of thought about parenting. I think you'd enjoy that. But, you know, do you really need to get along, right? With whom are you trying to get along? That is, try to the extent that you can to find other parents around you who you don't think of as threats. You don't want to get along with people who you truly think of as threats. Now, you've also got to separate, and I know this is hard in the world in which we live right now, you got to separate politics from the rest of life, right? If somebody voted for Biden, are they a threat to you? In a sense, yes. But can you now not have any relationship with them? Are they literally a threat to you on a day-to-day basis? So you can't interact with them without being a Keating? I don't think so. I mean, you've got to, particularly when you've got a young child, you've got to let politics rest a little bit. You got to focus on the child. You've got to focus on education. You got to focus on getting in the best education. You got to focus on his environment, on what's going on around you. Don't let, and I don't know that you are, so I'm not saying that you are, but don't let politics dictate everything that is around you, that is around you right now and relevant to your child. Try to make decisions about your child that take into account the context, in that narrow context that is your child, and what his needs are, and what to do about him. Don't be a Keating no matter what. Don't be a Keating no matter what. That is, if you're going to offend certain people because of the positions you take, so be it. You've got to stand by them. Don't give up your values no matter what. Your child will benefit from that. Your child will suffer if you start selling out. Your child will suffer from that. So you've got to stick to your principles, particularly when it comes to his well-being, his or her well-being, and particularly when it comes to their education and how you deal with them. So that needs to be your priority. That needs to be your focus. Okay, let's go back to our panel. Matt.
Okay, on the topic of eviction bans of that genre.
Yeah.
I've seen in conversations with people who I come across, there's kind of two ways it can go. Is one way to say, well, tenants need help more than property owners, so don't worry about it, just help the property owners. And then what I consider to be a little better thought, some people say, well, landlords are people too. Let's help the tenants. And by let's, I mean the government should help the tenants, but the government should also help landlords. And I meet basically nobody who goes beyond that and says, well, if the government can help tenants and they can help landlords, then is there no other third party who's being harmed? It just stops right there. And that logic, it's like the government can just help anybody with anything. No one sees that there's a cost. There's a less obvious cost. So there's something missing in the logic. The train's not going far enough. And help tenants and help landlords. Boom. That's the moral action. So can you talk about why it's immoral for the government to both help tenants and landlords?
Well, I mean, the government shouldn't help anybody, right? I mean, that's the fundamental principle, is that it's not the government's job to help us. It's the government's job to protect us from coercion, protect us from force. And there is no coercion or force. And to the extent that there is an issue, with regard to the virus, then the government's responsibility was to deal with that issue. And if they dealt with it properly, and they still are not, then you wouldn't have had to help tenants or landlords. The economy would have maybe suffered a little bit, but not dramatically, right? The solution is for the government to stick to its knitting, to stick to what it's supposed to do. And if it does that well, then there's nobody that needs help. But the problem is, yeah, go ahead, Matt.
I saw a video about, because a lot of the eviction bans are expiring, but they always come under pressure to get extended, and they always get it extended. There was a protest in New York City and that was attended and supported by politicians who I think self-identify as progressive. And one of the chants in the crowd, I don't know if the politicians participated in the chant, but the crowd was chanting, "No landlords, no cops, all evictions gotta stop." So just focusing on the no landlords part, I feel like that ties back to the same mentality of housing as a human right, basically that it shouldn't be private property. It should just be something that is
Absolutely.
just there.
But so should food, and once you go down that road, everything becomes a human right. And if everything becomes a human right, everything is government must provide for. And therefore government, this is communism, right? This is the logical path to communism. But it's all being driven by even people who don't necessarily object to private property, right? Republicans supported, Republicans supported the moratorium, right?
Trump started it, yeah. Yeah,
Trump started it, although I'm not supposed to say Trump started anything, right? Because Biden is so evil, we should pretend that Trump was the good guy. Everybody supports this. And the reason is it's altruism, right? Here's a group of people who are renters. Most renters are perceived to be low income, and many of them are. Low income people are poor. That's what low income means. They need help. They are not as good off as everybody else. And therefore, it's our moral duty before anything else. It's our moral duty to help them. It's our moral duty more than to help them. It's our moral duty to sacrifice them for them. Now, how are we going to sacrifice for them? We are not, we can't sacrifice. So we look for a group of people who are less poor, Landlords, right? I mean, by definition, you're less poor because you own the place. So, you know, people who are less poor, and we impose the sacrifice on them, a name of sacrifice. And then a few poor landlords show up, right? So what are the examples they bring out is, I don't know,
Mom and pop.
Yeah, mom and pop.
So mom and pop. There's some arbitrary line where at some point you've gone from small mom and pop to you know, big. At some point, you know, your property rights or individual rights no longer matter. There's some arbitrary line. You
find the needy landlords, right? You find the suffering landlords, and then you say, we need to sacrifice to them. And so who are we going to sacrifice to them? Maybe we'll sacrifice the rich landlords. Maybe we'll sacrifice everybody to them through higher taxes, more debt, higher inflation, whatever the outcome of all these possible are. And of course, most people think that they're being clever here, that they're getting a free lunch because they think, oh, we made rich landlords sacrifice to everybody else. You know, what a coup, right? And of course, what they don't realize is there's a massive cost to this that's going to impact everybody in society. That, you know, that they're going to be fewer landlords, there are going to be fewer rental properties, prices of real estate are going to go up. They're going to find it more difficult to buy a home. At the same time, because the government is issuing so much money to try to bail everybody out, that's going to impact economic growth in the future. They're going to grow less. They're going to have less wealth. They're going to have less success. They're going to have less prosperity. They might have inflation. Their taxes are going to go up. And one day, like 10 years ago, they'll wake up and they'll blame somebody completely new for all the things that they inflicted on themselves by supporting these government policies. But that's typical because we don't see the chain of events, because the chain of events is complicated, it's long, it's convoluted, it requires a real deep understanding of cause and effect, and nobody is interested in any of that. So we all pretend that it doesn't exist and we can just go on as if none of this happened. I mean, I keep telling people we're still suffering because we passed the securities laws in 1933 and 1934, right? We're still suffering dramatically in this country from laws that were passed 80 years ago, 85 years ago. And people, you know, and the source of a lot of these problems are what FDR did back in the Great Depression. They don't care. Or we're still suffering from the bailout of the SNLs, right? Who remembers the bailout of the SNLs? Very few people know what an SNL even is anymore. But we bailed the SNLs out in the 1990s, and at the time, it seemed like a free lunch. I would argue we've suffered since then because of the bailout of the SNLs. All kind of bad things have happened because of that. So, but nobody sees those connections. Those are kind of abstract, difficult, historical, who cares kind of connections. Landlords are rich, tenants are poor. Sacrifice the rich to the poor. Easy, we're done. Everybody's happy, you know. And that's politics, and that's morality in people's minds. That's how they think about morality.
Thank you.
Sure. Jennifer.
That reminds me of just one thing. James Madison once on the Capitol floor, there was some kind of fire or something, and somewhere, and they were asking the government for money, and he said something like, well, that's not the government's job, is to help people. And could you imagine anybody saying that on the Capitol now?
It actually was in Madison.
Who was it?
And it's not clear if it's a true story, but it is a good story, so it's worth repeating. It's Davy Crockett.
Oh, Davy Crockett. Okay.
So it's Davy Crockett, who was this is a great story. It's a congressman from Tennessee. And he was in Congress, and a bill came in front of Congress. So it's a bit of a lengthy story, so I don't mind, Jennifer, if I tell it. So a bill comes to Congress about this widow of some decorated war veteran, right? And she's starving, and nobody's taking care of her. She has no money. And he's a veteran, and he served the country and all this stuff. And it comes to Congress, and Congress votes to give her a pension. And Davy Crockett votes for it. He votes to give her a pension. And then he's running for re-election, and he goes back to Tennessee. And he's out somewhere in the middle of Tennessee, and he goes to this guy who he very much respects, kind of one of these older statesman of that era in Tennessee, whose name I can't remember, but the story has it. And he asks him if he's going to vote for him. And the guy says, no, Davy, I'm not going to vote for you. And like Davy Crockett says, why? And the guy says, because of your vote on the widow, on the pension. He says, it was not your money to give. And the story that tells all of this is called Not Yours to Give. You can probably find it if you Google Not Yours to Give, Davy Crockett. And Davy goes, what do you mean? Isn't it the job of the government to? And the guy gives him the whole spiel, Declaration of Independence, your job is to protect rights. I mean, a really good foundational kind of thing. And Davy Crockett says, yeah, you're right. And then he goes back to Washington. And there's the fire, and there's literally a fire in Washington. A number of buildings are being destroyed. And Congress goes immediately into session because all the congressmen have seen the fire with their own eyes. And a vote comes to the House to provide compensation for the people whose buildings were destroyed. And Davy Crockett goes up there and says, it's not yours to give. And he gives the spiel about this is not the job of Congress. This is not what it should do. And he actually convinces the House, and they voted down. And that is the story. And I don't know if it's truth or myth, but no matter what, it's a good story. And you can find the whole thing written out really well, articulated beautifully, I think on Google somewhere. So Not Yours to Give, Davy Crockett. And of course, Davy Crockett is famous for then at some point leaving Tennessee and going to Texas and joining the Alamo and dying at the Alamo for kind of freedom and liberty against the Santa Anna, the dictator from Mexico. So anyway, that's my little history lesson, or maybe history, maybe myth. Jennifer, sorry.
Am I supposed to ask about Mouse?
Oh, okay, well, no, you don't have to. I didn't know if that was a question.
Well,
or just me.
I do have a question. You know how you used to say in your talks about we don't have claws or fangs or anything, so we use our minds and stuff.
Yeah.
But if you look at our closest relatives, like chimps and gorillas, I mean, they're really strong. They can break your arm. They still have physical claws and all that, not claws, but fangs and strength. So do you think maybe that kind of stuff, we don't have it anymore because we don't need it? So it kind of got evolved out? Yeah,
it evolved out because as human consciousness, uniqueness of human consciousness evolved in, those things were necessary and evolved out of us. It became, it's a burden biologically to be strong, for example, right? Because it requires a lot of energy to keep up the muscles, to keep them, to keep yourself strong requires a lot of burning of calories. And if you think about the organ, I think this is true, the organ that burns the most calories in human beings is the brain. We need those calories to think. Thinking is a high calorie. So instead of developing muscles, instead of going and, to develop chimpanzee-like strength, or gorilla type strength, we spend those calories on a brain, and we get more bang for the buck that way.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. David. You're muted.
All right. So yeah, this is along the lines of the not yours to give. That's a good segue, I guess you would say. I have a question for you. When arguing with someone or debating people that want to tax us and give the money away, whether it's, I mean, who cares, any government program, giving it to NPR, NASA, or anything else. I hear you say it sometimes that it's stealing, and I love your analogy of how if your neighbor comes over and takes your money, they throw him in jail, but if he goes and gets everybody to vote, I steal that from you. I use that all the time. It's a great analogy. So that being the case, when we're debating or when someone is pushing for government programs and stuff like that, you touch on it sometimes about the stealing, but the fact of the matter is, morally, no matter virtually every morality out there has stealing is wrong.
Yep.
It's one that almost nobody disagrees with. So I don't know what the question is. Why don't you do it more? Because I hear you do it some, but really, I mean, can you frame the conversation? Well, we should do this and do this and this. And you say, well, isn't that stealing? And just shut up and make them.
Well, you can. The challenge is that they don't hold it as such in their minds. And even when you point it out, it's hard for them. And there is some danger in doing that because, there is something about the fact that it is the government doing and the fact that most people support it. Now, for us, having the proper moral approach to that, we say that doesn't matter, right? But you have to, what they have to get first is that, in a sense, morality precedes the state, and that democracy, I mean, this is a shock to them, does not override morality. Right? Democracy cannot override morality. But both of those, and of course, the other element is that you believe in principles, right? For us, don't steal or don't lie or don't, that's a principle. We don't do it. We just don't do it ever, right? I mean, the context by which we would do it would have to be extreme and bizarre to get to that. That's what a principle means. But they don't think in principles. They're complete pragmatists. But wait a minute, if I take from you, and they'll never use the word, but if I take from you and give to somebody else, I'm also helping them, and that's moral. It's moral to help them. So yeah, maybe it's immoral to take from you, but it's even more immoral not to help this person. So on net, and that's the problem. The problem is you can't corner them. It's not about cornering them because they don't think in principles and they'll have a way out of their corner no matter what. It really is, and this is my whole point about debating, right? It's to intrigue the person in the audience. It's to say something that intrigues them to go look further. It's not to beat your opponent, because your opponent's not going to be beat in the sense of going to be change his mind. It's about opening the mind up of somebody in the audience who might be open to your ideas, and bringing up the issue of by what right you take from one person and give to another is an important issue. I try to bring it up often, not always, depending on the context of the conversation. You usually do, and I just wonder why you didn't hammer on it more. That makes sense. I would say, if someone's somewhat reasonable, maybe bringing it up will cause them to go back and actually think about it, and they've never thought about it that way before. Maybe we're doing some good at that point. I don't know. I try to avoid the kind of thing that libertarians often do, which is taxation is theft. I mean, it is in a sense, but that's way too, not a starting point. It's not a starting point, and it's you have to walk somebody through it. And ultimately, you need and they often use it in order to say, well, you can't have government. You need a government in order to protect us from theft, in order to find what theft is. And it's a complicated issue, and they oversimplify it by going taxation is theft. It's dangerous. But yes, I agree with you. Pointing out the fact that it is force, it is coercion, it is violence, and we usually abhor violence. We usually claim that violence is wrong, and yet here we're okay with it. Is a good strategy. It's not yours to give. Not yours to give, absolutely. Well, not yours to take. Take, yes. Take. Darius. Thank you.
Thanks, Ron. So I live in California, and I was researching or studying up on the recall here, for the governor, and I was reading up on the leading candidate, Larry Elder. I was reading on his platform on his website, and he's a Republican, and so I was surprised to find no mentioning of the usual things that turned me off about that party. There was no mention of religion, hardly. There was no mention of nationalism, hardly, or at all. just very light on collectivism in general and altruism in general. And instead, he was talking about school choice, and he rejects the kind of the anti-racism thought, and having a consistent energy policy, and just figuring out how to keep businesses in California and lowering regulations, just stuff I generally agree with. So my question for you is, first of all, what are your thoughts about the recall in general? And then do you have any opinions on Larry Elder?
Well, I'm generally favorable towards recalling Newsom. I think Newsom's a disaster, and any one of these governors in California have been real disasters. What was the governor that we recalled 20 years ago or something? I forget his name, but Schwarzenegger stepped in and replaced him in a similar kind of process to this. So it is, yeah, I'm happy to see government being challenged by the people, even if the process is not the most rational process to do so, right? So it's not the case that you have a recall and then you have an election. The recall is the election. So you vote in the recall, both whether you want to recall Newsom or not, and then you vote on who you would want to replace Newsom. So first, no Democrat is on the ballot, I think, because Newsom's on the ballot in a sense, right?
There's at least one.
There is at least one. Okay, maybe.
I think there's a lot. I already got the ballot. There's like 40 candidates on it. I already mailed it in. There's a whole bunch.
So there's a lot of candidates, and you don't need 50% of the vote to win. So what could happen is, let's say 50.1% of people vote to recall Newsom, and let's see Larry Elder gets 15%, but everybody else gets less than 15% because there are 40 candidates. He becomes governor of California, which is pretty crazy. But because he'll become governor of California with only 15% of the vote, but it could happen. Now, I have a feeling that Newsom's not going to lose the vote, but he's not going to be recalled. And the polls seem to suggest he's not going to be recalled, but we'll see. I mean, this is all in flux and it's hard to tell. Cool. Let's see him gone. I mean, the people are holding politicians' feet to the fire. Newsom was a disaster during COVID. Let him be gone. Now, about Larry Elder himself, he's mostly in his career being tilted towards more libertarian than typical Republican. So he's got a lot of kind of the free market kind of stuff down. He is religious, and on his radio show, he does bring religion up quite a bit. He never had me on his show, partially because of the issue of religion. So he definitely, and I can't remember if he said anything about Rand or not, but I just can't remember. But he's a little like Prager in that sense, right? Maybe less adamant about the religiosity than Prager, but he's definitely religious. He has, unfortunately, over the last few weeks, maybe last few months, become more supporting of Trump's conspiratorial stuff, right? Because I think he senses he needs those votes. So when the election was over, he basically said, yeah, Trump lost, right? And now he's kind of repeating a lot of the conspiracy stuff. On COVID, he's vaccinated, but he has had on his show a lot of kind of wacky, irreputable anti-vax types on the show. So I don't know. I mean, you got to elect somebody. He seems like about as good as anybody else, and maybe better. And it would be fun if he got elected, because it would be such a shock to the system in California, right? It would just blow their minds. How he could govern, I don't know, because the Democrats have super majorities in the Senate and the House in California. So it's not like he could do anything, right? But he could stop everything Democrats want to do. He'd veto everything. Now they might have a veto-proof majority, I'm not sure. But yeah. do it. Just, just to piss off the Democrats, it would be fun to watch. And he won't be able to do any damage because he can't get anything passed. So he can't do any bad things. He can only do good, is my assumption.
Yeah, it seems like every rare opportunity there is to bring a little balance to the political system in California, we should seize on it.
Yeah. I mean, if he was really bad, I would say no way. But he strikes me as good on a lot of things, put it that way. And without the kind of crazy tendencies that some have that I've opposed in the past and will oppose in the future. Thanks
for pointing out some of the criticisms too. I appreciate it. I don't have a lot of background with them.
All right, let me see. $20 questions. OMG puppies. Putin is no saint, but some think the establishment hates him because he stopped Western looting of Russia in the 1990s. Really? He stopped Berezovsky, this money laundering, asset stripping of Gazprom. No. He stopped the looting by people he didn't like, and he completely embraced and supported the looting by people he liked. And the person Putin likes the most is Putin. I mean, there is rampant speculation, and I don't think it's speculation, I think it's probably true, that Putin might be as rich as like Jeff Bezos in terms of the amount of money he is, well, maybe not quite as rich, but an amount of money he's looted from the Russian treasury that is sitting in Swiss bank accounts. The guy is the biggest looter, the biggest oligarch supporter in the history of Russia. This is what he did bring, and this is why some Russians like Putin. Many, actually, majority of Russians, I think, support Putin. He brought, quote, law and order. Not my kind of law, not my kind of order, but he basically stopped the gangsters. Not Western looting. There wasn't any Western looting. There was Russians looting from one another. But what there was mafia-style violence in the streets, right? And there was out and out corruption and gangsters everywhere. And basically what Putin did is what would happen under anarchy. So before Putin, there were multiple police forces and multiple, legal systems, if you will, run by different oligarchs and different mafia-like organizations. And what Putin did is he consolidated power. He basically took them all out, and now we have only one mafia in Russia, and it's called Putin and his oligarchs, the people he has around him. And he controls it all, and he controls the levers of power of the Russian government, and uses them to benefit his wealth and his attaining even more power. So there was no Western looting. There was no stripping of Gazprom. This is buying into the idea that Western companies in other countries loot them. They don't loot them. They trade with them. They brought technology to Gazprom. They allowed them to drill in places that they couldn't drill before. It was a trade. So it was primarily that there was no law and order. There was complete corruption, and Putin imposed order, and that's what he's respected for. And the Russians, as Ayn Rand never liked Russia. She was very negative on Russia, even independent of communism. She viewed it as a mystical society that wanted and sought out authoritarianism. And he's an authoritarian. He's an authoritarian gangster. He's the most ruthless of all the gangsters, and that's why he survived and they did not. Dave asked, is your view that working class conservative voters don't really matter in changing the culture? That it all depends on replacing intellectuals in academia and Silicon Valley in order for us to win? Yes. I mean, I don't think working class conservative or non-conservative, any kind of working class voters matter in the big picture of history. Other than they right now are the tools of a particular set of ideologies, the left and the backlash against the left, which is the right. So they are, unfortunately, but the reality is that this is what they are. They are swayed by the intellectuals or by hatred of the intellectuals. One way or the other, it's by the intellectuals that they are swayed to support this candidate or that candidate. If you replace the intellectuals and suddenly you have good intellectuals, they would be swayed by them. So it's the mind that shapes history. Therefore, it's people who shape the mind that matters. Who shapes the mind? Intellectuals. Maybe the shaping of the mind is by destroying it, which is what modern intellectuals do, but it's still the mind that is their business, right? It's the business of the mind that matters long-term. Let's see, Kyle asks, from 1980 to 2001, the US was already an M1 society moving towards M2, or was it an M1 society heading towards an I society until 9/11? Attacks caused 180-degree change in our direction towards becoming an M2 society. No, I think, yeah, from 1980, we were definitely an M1 society. I think the religious elements within our society were growing. That was why Ayn Rand would not vote for Reagan, if you remember, is because she feared he would bring religion in. It wasn't just that he would appeal to religion, but that he would bring religion into the heart of the Republican Party and basically allow it to be taken over by the religious conservatives, by the evangelicals, by the moral majority. So they represented the M2s, or again, the M1s on the verge of M2. I'm not sure anybody literally completely represented M2. But so it was already heading in that direction before 9/11. And because there wasn't a consistent M1 movement, like Clinton is not an M1, he's more of a D1, right? A disintegration one. This is again from Dim Hypothesis, Leonard Peacock's book. So I think Clinton's more of a D. So it was alternating between M1 and D1s with a general thrust towards M2. George W. Bush is an M2 in a sense that he, born again Christian. You remember, what was it called? Something conservatism, compassionate conservatism. So Christian conservatism, or conservatism imbued with Christianity. So the thrust was moving us towards an M2 from the rise of the evangelicals as a powerful political movement in the United States. At least that's my understanding of how Leonard viewed it. And then 9/11 pushed us closer to that. It in a sense, sped up the process by both emboldening the M2s and the D2s. Again, often M2 is a response to D2. And Obama was the closest we've had to a D2. And Trump, you could argue where Trump falls, but that dynamic, I'm talking about Bush Jr., the son, that dynamic is bringing us closer, I think, to M2. But, that's hard because it's hard to project kind of what the future is going to be. Future projection is very, very difficult and prone to error. There's no question. Henry asks, Rand mentions Japanese romantic composers in the Romantic Manifesto. Have you noticed the strong romantic aesthetic in Japanese music and art? As a kid, Japanese music, television changed my life, and many share this experience. I think there probably is. I've noticed that recently in Korean drama, a strong romantic element in Korean drama. I think it also exists in Japanese animation. I'm going to review a Japanese animated movie next show. There have been some phenomenal Japanese musicians that are particularly good with romantic music. I think there were some composers, although I don't know any, and I'm not sure who Rand mentioned about in terms of Japanese composers, but there certainly is an element, or there was an element in Japanese art post-World War II, a romantic element in that art. I don't know how strong it is. I don't know enough about, Japanese art. I mean, there is an element of it in some of Kurosawa's work, and in some other Japanese movies. Enric says Trump is D2 with the cover of M2. There's a sense in which that's right. I think that's right, but that's a whole other discussion. All right, let's see. That was the last $20 question. Okay, one more round with you guys. Matt.
Okay, so the county supervisors where I live, when they have an ordinance up for consideration, there's this thing called a board letter that kind of tells you about it. Yep. And there's always been a row on it at the beginning. There's a section, it's called business impact statement. And they've never been very thoughtful, in their analysis of that. Like when the county passed our eviction ban, the business impact statement was, this ordinance will help tenants and families. And that was the business impact statement. It had nothing to do really with business. But they've recently added a new paragraph to every ordinance called the equity impact statement. And these answers are often a paragraph or a page long, and there's someone putting a lot of effort into when they write this. And my local newspaper, there's every page has an article that works equity in somehow. Every press release from our politicians is always, everything's through the lens of equity. And maybe I'm defining it wrong, but it's close to the best definition I can say. When I hear equity, that means bringing equal outcomes. We're saying it's not equal opportunity, it's equal, we're pushing for equal outcomes. And equal outcomes, people having, the same amount of stuff, that's pretty much the point of communism. The main feature of communism is everyone has the same amount of stuff. So everyone is openly advocating for equity, but none of these people would say self-identify as a communist, but I feel like they're pushing for the same thing. What am I missing here?
Well, what you're missing is that they don't take their concept seriously, right? People are saying equity, they don't know what it means. They have no clue what it means. They have a vague notion that equity is the word they're supposed to say right now if they believe in fairness, if they believe in justice. Ask them what fairness and justice means. They don't really know. They certainly don't think it means communism. They certainly don't think it means equality of outcome. If they did, they would reject it if it was put in stark terms. So there are people out there who are clearly communists, or I don't know communists, but they're egalitarianism. They're worse than communists in my view. The egalitarians, they're really, really bad guys who want equality of outcome. There are people out there, usually intellectuals, usually on the left, usually at universities. They don't actually work for a living. They don't actually participate in life. They're somewhere in the intellectual stratospheres. But they set the terms of debate. So they know what equity means, but they'll never admit it. But they make it so that equity is the word you have to say if you're going to be cool, if you're going to be good, if you're going to be just, if you're going to be acceptable in society, right? Whatever that means. And so everybody else starts using equity. They don't know what it means. It's just the right thing to say. And it kind of vaguely means fairness, and it kind of vaguely means not making a lot of money. But of course, I am going to make a lot of money. I don't care. I'm just going to put this in a statement. Nobody cares. And that's how it spreads to society, becomes just a term that everybody uses. But of course, it has a meaning that the intellectuals give it, and they're going to use it against you over and over again when they raise your taxes. It's just getting in the name of equity. And you agreed that equity was a good thing. You used it in your own thing. And that's how they slowly erode your freedoms and erode your, your confidence in what you're doing. Just looking for a, let me just, one second. You know, here's just a website. It says equality means each individual or group of people is given the same resources, opportunities. All right, what does that even mean? Who given by whom? Resources, you're given resources. Who gives you those resources? It's a BS definition. But anyway, equity recognizes that each person has different circumstances and allocates the exact resources and opportunities needed to reach an equal outcome. Yeah.
So there it says equal outcome, right?
Yeah. Yeah. But nobody actually holds that in terms of what that means, other than, I guess, the person who wrote this article. Right. So if you've got a lot, you get a little. Your opportunity set is reduced. If you have a little, you get a lot. Your opportunity set is increased in order to achieve equality of outcome.
Very cringeworthy.
What's that?
It just makes me cringe, and it's everywhere. You know, in all the local publications, and it's just presented as a no-brainer that if you don't support equity, you're just a horrible person, you know, and that's like not contested at all.
And it's not what equity actually means. Equity means fairness, which means the exact opposite of that. I mean, I like the word equity. I own equity in stocks. It means, you know, it doesn't mean what they've made it into meaning. Mm-hmm. They lost on equality. They lost on fairness. So now they're trying with the equity. Here's a quote from Paula Drezel and you can't believe, you know, the names of these institutes, just unbelievable. She works for the Race Matters Institute, which 3 years ago, I would have assumed was a white supremacist organization. And now I know as to be an anti-racist organization, Race Matters Institute. And this is the quote. The route to achieving equity will not be accomplished through treating everybody equally. It will be achieved by treating everyone justly according to their circumstances. Now, there's a sense in which I agree, but I have a sense that we completely disagree on what justly means. And that's the point. Equity just means treating people justly.
Sounds good. Count me in.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what you mean. But that's reliant on us having a common definition of what justice is. And then there's not, you know, agreement on that.
Yeah, and this is from a website on public health from George Washington University. All right, I just saved the article. I'll do a show on that. I'll do a show on equity versus equality. All right, that'll be fun. Right. Thanks, man. All right, Jennifer.
Did you say that not too long ago you thought hypocrisy is not a particularly bad vice or something? Did you say something like that?
Yeah, I don't. Hypocrisy is everywhere, and it's not what matters, right? So what matters is not the consistency. Well, I mean, when you've got bad ideas, pointing out to you that you're not consistently practicing it won't convince you of anything. It won't convince anybody of anything. It's not a good way to argue.
Right. I guess, I understand what you mean. It's not a good way to argue. But I guess like it annoys me personally because I associate it with being a liar, because I think if you really believe like you shouldn't drink milk, it's poison, then you probably wouldn't drink it yourself. But if you tell other people not to and then you drink it yourself, you probably don't really believe it. So you're lying. You know what I mean?
I think they believe it. See, that's the thing. They don't have moral principles, right? You have moral principles. You say, if I'm going to say something, if I believe something, I believe something, and that's it. It's done. But for them, you know, think of it. We're all sinners. Nobody's perfect. Indeed, sin is what defines us. inability to live, and this is on the left and on the right, because the left believes we're all sinners, right? The original sin is just different. We're all sinners, we're all imperfect, we're all incapable of sticking to our beliefs. And therefore, yeah, I cheated. You know, what are you going to do about it? I lied. So, you know, we're all sinners. I'll say, I'll apologize and I'll pay some tithing and I'll ask for forgiveness. But hypocrisy is built into Christianity. It assumes you're going to be a hypocrite and gives you a way out, right? By confessional or by whatever, by saying 50 Hail Marys or whatever it is that they used to say, right?
No, you have to be a hypocrite because you can't actually live like that.
That's the point.
I know that you can't.
It's built into the system. Hypocrisy is built into the system.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me. They're all hypocrites all the time. All the time. You know, the evangelicals, you know, are family people and they despise sex is bad and all this stuff. They constantly, you know, they go to strip clubs and they go to whatever, you know, hookers and everything, and doesn't bother them. I mean, it bothers them, but then they just accept that they're sinful beings.
Well, that's messed up.
It's very messed up. Religion is messed up. David.
Yeah, speaking of, I live in Alabama. You wouldn't imagine what it's like being an objectivist in Alabama, I'll tell you.
Yeah, it's not easy.
But I don't have a question. I wanted to, if you don't mind, take just a minute to thank you for something.
Sure.
And I've heard many times that people thank you for bringing them to objectivism. And you did not bring me to objectivism. Many years ago, I'm a big fan of the band Rush, the rock band. I know Jennifer loves
you
it.
and Jennifer, yeah.
Jennifer, my son's middle name is Getty. Do you believe that?
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, I have a pretty cool wife to allow me to do that, you know, because but it was 7 words in a book, you know, dedicated in the album liner notes, dedicated to the genius of Ayn Rand. I said, well, who's Ayn Rand? I went and looked it up. Well, I just went crazy over it, and I read everything I could, and was so engaged for many years in my teenage and late my 20s years. And then I just a lot of it was probably my fault. I probably was kind of hard-headed, and I just couldn't understand why everybody else didn't see it. And I got very frustrated. Nobody cares. And I got very disengaged with objectivism, which, and then I was listening to, and I periodically listen to things. And when you started guest hosting on Leonard's show, I don't know what it is that, I don't know why you get credit for it. I should have seen it all along, but you kind of brought it out that, look, it's not just about, them, it's about you being objective, what it does for your life. So again, I've heard a lot of people thank you for bringing them to objectivism, but you re-engaged me that, and I've been much happier, and just, you know, I really want to thank you for that.
Oh, that's great. I appreciate that. Thanks for telling me that, and I really appreciate it. And I'm happy to have had that effect. So that's marvelous. Good. Yeah, that seems like, one respect, it seems like just yesterday I was doing Leonard's podcast, and it's what, 2013 or something like that. It's a long time now. It's like 7-8 years ago. So it's a long time.
You brought a lot to it. It was good.
I enjoyed it. It was an honor because it was under his name. So it was a real honor for him to kind of say, he basically said, I'm fed up with politics. I don't want to think about it. I don't want to deal with it. I trust Yaron can do it, you know. And that was a real honor for me. So it was a lot of fun. Great. Darius.
Thank you. So I'm wondering, you know, I was happy to see the recent email from the OCON folks that they're kind of stepping up their safety requirements for the conference around COVID. And I was wondering what you think about the policy that they have that if you're vaccinated, you do not have to show a negative test.
Yeah.
It seems to me you can still come there negative even if you're vaccinated. We know that pretty well now.
Positive.
I'm sorry, you can still come there positive, right? It doesn't seem like a tall order or a big ask for everyone to get tested. I was wondering what you think of that.
I mean, we debated it. So I was part of the decision-making at the board level, and we debated it, and we consulted epidemiologists. We consulted the science.
I was wondering that too.
What's that?
I was wondering that as well.
Yeah,
Like,
we
did you
definitely
consult
did.
on
So
that?
we had at the board meeting, we consulted epidemiologists, and we got the best advice we could.
Which was?
And basically what we were advised was, look, yes, somebody who is vaccinated can get COVID, but A, the probability of getting it is low. B, the probability of having a high enough viral load to give it to other people is low. And if everybody else in the room is vaccinated, the probability of you spreading it to those other people is low, right? So it's just, I mean, it is probabilities, right? But it's a low probability, and it's not, our view was it wasn't worth putting everybody through the effort of getting a test. And one of the things we were thinking of doing was actually providing, and we might do this, providing self-tests on premise, right? So buying the self-test at CVS and having people test themselves right there who are not vaccinated. On the other hand, if you look at the probabilities, basically we were told if you come to Austin right now, unvaccinated, given what's going on right now in Austin, you're very likely to get it. I mean, very likely, not just maybe, but very likely to get it. And you're very likely then to give it to others, maybe to the vaccinated. Maybe it's not a big deal for most vaccinated people, but it might be to one or two. But it's also the fact that if you get it, while you're at OCON, they would do, what do you call it, tracing. All of us came into contact with you. We might have to shut down the event. It's the cost, it's a big deal right now. But the difference in risk between if you're vaccinated or not vaccinated is massive in terms of your ability to give it to other people and get it. So we were dealing with the risky element there. And I still think if you're vaccinated, all of this is pretty low risk.
That's
I mean, I'm seeing numbers out of Israel, particularly now they vaccinated first. So they've got, the vaccine decays. So they've had a longer time for it to decay. But vaccinated people are getting it, but they're not going, it's still true. They're not going to hospital. They're not dying. I mean, they are, but the numbers are small. It's just not a big enough risk to make it worthwhile, the hassle. Now, again, people can do it themselves. I've seen a number of people who are vaccinated who are going to get tested anyway, because they'll feel more comfortable being there. And that's fine. That's great. So that's the thinking. But we did get advice from epidemiologists.
That's good to hear. And I am comfortable working with odds. I mean, that's what we do in investing.
Yes.
I would love to know, I know that the number's not known now, but I personally would love to know once, like on day one, when people arrive, what percentage are submitted, because we're uploading our vaccination cards, so they'll know.
Yeah.
I think the vaccinated would love to hear a high percentage. That would feel good to know that.
Yeah, I mean, having been so, I did a survey on HBL of the people going, how many were vaccinated, and it was something like, over 90% were vaccinated. There were 3 that were not. One, I think, got the first shot. The other one had the virus, so didn't feel like they need to get it vaccinated because they had it, which is, I think, to a large extent true. There's no reason to, if you had it, in Israel, for example, if you had the virus, you only get 1 shot. You don't get 2 because there's no need. You've got enough. If we were sophisticated, right? If the world was sophisticated, you'd basically go in, get an antibody test, figure out what your viral load is and adjust the number of shots you need to get it up to where it needs to be. And not count on everybody should be doing X, because they treat us as idiots. So everybody has to get vaccinated. Well, no, people who have already had it don't necessarily have to get vaccinated now. Maybe in 3 months they do, because by then, so instead of taking a scientific approach and walking us through and personalized medicine, you remember the promise of personalized medicine? Well, there's no personalized medicine when it comes to COVID. There's no treating us as individuals when it comes. So when I was in Israel, they required me to have an antibody test to come in, because they didn't trust the vaccine card from the US, because as we've seen, people are forging them. So I had a very high viral load, antibody load, right? 192, and I think the threshold is 30 or something like that. So, for now, I'm fairly confident that, it's not a problem. But imagine if our public health authorities or our doctors were generally telling us, might be a good idea every couple of months to go get an antibody test. It's a prick of a finger. It's very cheap. You get the results in 15 minutes, and you'll know exactly how many antibodies you have. And if your antibodies are really going down low, below 50 or below 30, maybe get a boost and then leave it up to us. And the boost costs $50. So make it costly. So there's some cost benefit analysis going on for people. And there's a real thinking going on. How about encouraging people to think? And it just drives me nuts. This COVID has illustrated all the bad features of our culture in terms of the government's behavior, people's behavior, the tribalism, but basically the unthinking of it all. Right? So it's just disappointing. But yes, we're also going to have the unvaccinated test a couple of days, 2 or 3 days into the conference. I
noticed that.
And of course, the lower your viral load, the less contagious you are. The lower the viral load, the less symptomatic you are. So that's why you don't have to do it every single day. And of course, if you have symptoms, we'll be telling them, go to your room, go get tested immediately. Don't show up if you don't feel well, if you have the snivels, if you lost your sense of taste and smell, it's a good sign, just isolate yourself immediately. So we will see. And generally, I think that people in risk groups shouldn't come. If you're older, if you're obese, if you've got heart or lung problems, just don't come. Autoimmune diseases, significant ones, just don't come. It's just because there are very few ICU beds in Austin. So even though the probability is very low of you getting it, the downside is so big that it just doesn't make sense coming. So I hope people make rational decisions and we have a safe and fun conference.
Thank you.
Sure. And that was part of why, part of this issue of vaccines and how difficult it is to give it to one another if you are vaccinated was one of the reasons why we're not requiring masks and stuff like that. So because it's at the margin, its efficaciousness is not that big if you're already vaccinated. If we weren't requiring tested of the unvaccinated, masks might make sense. But once you're requiring tested of the unvaccinated, it's a marginal issue. It's not worth the inconvenience associated with masks. All right, I'm going to go through some of these. This is going to be quick because these are the lower cost ones. I don't know how much money we've raised today. Alejandrina has not been here to keep track. I don't think we made $400, but so if anybody wants to jump in with some high dollar questions, that'd be great. All right, McMuffin, Mr. Muffin, not McMuffin, Mr. Muffin. Is democracy a good enough system? No, it's terrible. If you mean by democracy, majority rule, unlimited majority rule, it's not a good system. It's not even a good enough system. Now, restricted democracy, democracy that has restrictions on violations of individual rights, at least some restrictions, is a good enough system for a while. But it deteriorates, as we've seen with the United States, as we're seeing with Europe. It has to deteriorate. It's not a stable equilibrium. What you need is a truly rights-respecting government that limits voting to the representatives, but then limits what the representatives can do, limits their power so that they can only protect, they cannot harm. Will we be required to wear masks at Okan even if vaccinated? No. Nobody's actually required to wear masks at Okan. It's optional. Daniel asks, can't wait for the Richard Wolff debate you're on. Wolff must love the free market because his body mass index shows it. He also charges quite a bit of money for these debates. He's not doing them for free. I can assure you of that. Dean asks, but Yaron, what about long-term COVID effects? There is some proof of cognitive long-term effect. Very rare. Still very, very rare. You'd have to show me stats that show that it's not very rare for me to take it seriously. But at this point, I don't think it's worth worrying about. Again, I know people who've got COVID. Leonard Peikoff had COVID and recovered in spite of being 87 years old, having having lung problems, heart problems. I mean, the whole list was, he should have died. He got the best treatment possible and he survived. And there's no cognitive long-term. If my wife had COVID, she had a bad case that did not require hospital, right? She was at home. My wife had COVID. I never got it in spite of never distancing from her the whole time. Other people who came to our house while she had COVID, because we didn't know she had COVID, we only discovered after she had it. While she had COVID, she tested negative. Don't, get me started on that. But she had 2 false negative tests. But nobody who came to our house got COVID as far as we know, including my son who came. So COVID is very, very, very difficult to completely understand, but the long-term effects are very rare. And again, it's a probabilities issue. It's a probabilities issue. Enric asks, mutations tend to go where they are potential hosts. That's right. Evolutionary pressure. The children tend to be the host right now because adults are vaccinated. Doesn't it make sense that all possible populations that can be vaccinated should, looking long-term, but it doesn't matter. If they get COVID, they are going to be immune as well. So getting COVID is like getting a vaccine. And if the risk to the child of getting the vaccine, getting COVID is insignificant, then why not get the herd immunity the natural way, in a sense? So it's not that I'm against the child getting a vaccine, because the danger is minimal, particularly if they're monitored. I think there was some issue with the Johnson & Johnson for young people, but I don't think that issue exists for the Moderna or the Pfizer. So I really do think it's a choice. I'm with David. It's a tricky choice to make when somebody's 13. All right, Alex, if you were made president today, no, please don't make me president today. What actions would you take in Afghanistan to salvage the current situation? You really shouldn't tempt me with questions like this. I would invite the entire Taliban leadership to a peace conference and kill them all. Didn't that happen in Braveheart, where the King of England brought all the Scots there and he then slaughtered them all? I would. I mean, I wouldn't literally do that, but I would basically, give the Taliban. No, I wouldn't give the Taliban anything. I would basically annihilate them, and that would basically mean I would immediately put enough ground troops at the airport to protect, to be able to defend whatever happens over there. And if that meant 100,000 troops, I'd bring in 100,000 troops. I would kill the Taliban in the presidential palace. I'd bomb the presidential palace out of existence. And I would then make clear to them that we will go house by house, road by road, and we would clear them out of Kabul and whatever it would take, and that we would find every American. And if they hurt one hair on one American anywhere in the country, we would hunt them down anywhere that they went, whatever cave they found. And we would tell the Pakistanis, if you let one Taliban across the border, we're coming after you. And yes, I know Pakistan has nukes. They can't deliver them to the United States. They wouldn't bomb Afghanistan with them. What are they going to do exactly? They're going to use their nukes. They're going to waste them. I mean, they're saving them to use in India. They're going to use them in the US. Forget it. It's not happening. They would cower. They would drop to their knees and ask for forgiveness. So I would go house by house. I would find every American there. And of course, you would have to do this right? You would have to stealthily put special forces into all kinds of places within Kabul. So they wouldn't start killing Americans before you had the opportunity to get there. But you would make it very clear what would happen to them if they started killing Americans, if they touched them. And you would basically go in and I would just do whatever was necessary to destroy the Taliban. ISIS, I don't know if you know, but ISIS in Afghanistan is now threatening the Americans in the airport. So they're all panicking because of ISIS. We have satellites above Afghanistan. We have satellites above every place in the world that can basically find a needle in a haystack. I mean, not quite, but almost, right? You can see somebody's driver's license if that's what you really want to see. And we have drones all over the skies there. Don't tell me we can't find these bastards and kill them and just take them out of existence. Systematically, thoroughly, whatever it takes. Yes, they'll go into hiding. They'll adapt into the civilian population. Okay, well, then some civilians are going to die. Some civilians are going to die. We take out their communication networks. I would take out the entire cell phone network in Afghanistan, make it impossible for them to communicate. They don't have anything more sophisticated. They're probably not, they don't have satellites. Make it so it's impossible for them to defend themselves, and then crush them, and then rally anybody who wants to leave Afghanistan and get them out of there and bring them home. But of course, we can't even bring the Afghans home because, people are panicking that the Afghans are going to come to the United States and take over in the United States. This is, you can't generalize from one observation, but I'll just give you this one observation. I was once this was in Copenhagen. I'm pretty sure it was Copenhagen. And I ordered an Uber. This is one of the rare, Uber in Copenhagen is on and off. The government keeps letting them do it, and then they shut them down. And the taxi drivers hate Uber. They hate them. And they slash their tires. They're really brutal to them. So I was in Copenhagen, and I ordered an Uber in my hotel. And the guy wouldn't come in front of the hotel because the taxis were there, and you want to stay away. So I had to walk like a block and meet him, and got in the Uber, and we talked about taxi drivers, and we talked about that. And then he went on this whole spiel on how he hates Europe because they're not free enough and they don't respect freedom. And this Uber is allowing him to feed him, and his dream is to come to America. And he believes in capitalism, and he believes in freedom, and he believes in entrepreneurship, and he wants to make money, and he wants to be successful as a person. And the Europeans are stifling his ability to do that. And he's clearly got a very strong accent. And he's lived for 10 years in Denmark or whatever. So I asked him where he was from, and he was from Afghanistan. He was a Muslim from Afghanistan who wanted the American dream. That's all he wanted. He wanted an opportunity to succeed and to be left alone. And God, yes, this is the kind of person we need in America, because Americans don't know this, right? In Austin, they don't know this, because in Austin, Texas, they banned Uber. For years, you couldn't get an Uber in Austin, Texas. I think they're back now. So anyway, so that's what I would do. But of course, that wouldn't all I would do, right? Since I'm in Afghanistan, that gives me a second front to take out the Iranian regime once and for all. But that's a whole other story, right? So we'd have to clean up the world. We'd have to, and it wouldn't be that costly, because if you take the right approach, people will capitulate. They will fall down. They're not going to fight if they know they're going to lose. All right, we got a $20 question. Should Bush have just nuked Tora Bora in 2001 and be done with Afghanistan? Nuking Tora Bora was not a bad idea at all. Nuking Tora Bora would have had some, you could have used a tactical nuke. You would have taken out the whole mountain. You basically would have taken out all those tunnels. I advocated for it at the time, I think. It would have, you might have had some, what do you call it, radioactivity drift into Pakistan or parts of Afghanistan, but it's a pretty remote area. It's pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It would have been minimal. I don't know that the Chinese would have been happy or the Indians would have been happy given their proximity to it, but you could have told them to go to hell and just done it. Yeah, that would definitely be a potential. The other thing about Bora, you could have landed the Marines in there and they could have cleaned it out. Instead, we relied on the Pakistanis and on mercenaries. We relied on the Northern Alliance and Afghans to root out Al Qaeda from Tora Bora. We didn't do it ourselves. We could have done it ourselves, and we didn't even have to get to Tora Bora. I mean, I remember stories at the time that the U.S. had Bin Laden and convoys leading out of wherever he was hiding, going towards Tora Bora, and they wouldn't bomb it because there were women and children with him. And that's when I knew we'd lost, right? If you won't bomb Bin Laden because he's got his wives and his children with him, then what are you ever going to bomb, right? Michael says, I noticed the educated are the most indoctrinated. That's why they believe the lies. Yeah, and it's because the educated tend to be the ones who value in quotes the mind the most, or pay attention to issues of the mind the most, and that's where the corruption is most. It's with the issues of the mind. I was just listening to a podcast yesterday of this guy who was claiming that all of existence is a product of consciousness, not of any particular person's consciousness, and not God. There's no God, but there's this consciousness out there. And I was trying to figure out, and this is Michael Shermer was interviewing him, and I was trying to figure out, how does he justify this? How does he get to such a stupid conclusion? And now it's a conclusion most philosophers have got to since Plato, so maybe it's not that stupid, but I couldn't understand what the hell he was talking about. And it made no sense. It wasn't linked to anything in reality, because to link it to reality, you have to assume an independent reality. So people who are educated buy into this stuff in ways that I think uneducated people, now, again, uneducated people buy into religion. But the educated are more sophisticated in self-delusion. Scott says, even post-Afghanistan, would you still prefer Biden's re-election if somehow Trump got the nomination? Yes. I decided today that I am going to do a talk, and I don't know where exactly, but I'm going to do just an hour-long talk just on Trump, just breaking it down, because obviously I'm not communicating well, because you guys still ask me these questions. I think I made my views of Trump pretty clear. I will break it down and explain this to you so it's unequivocal. But yes, again, Biden will do more short-term damage. No question about that. Never thought otherwise. More short-term damage to places like Afghanistan. Although Trump would have done the same thing. So I don't believe anything would have been different in Afghanistan, for example, because the generals are the same generals. The intelligence is the same in general, the same intelligence. The people around Trump wanted him to get out ASAP, and he was willing to pull the trigger quickly. He wanted it by May. So I think exactly the same thing would have happened. So while blame Biden, we should, and everything, the idea that Trump would have managed this better is absurd and ridiculous, and I don't agree. But Biden's going to do more damage to the economy. Biden will do more damage to energy. Biden will do more damage to the environment, the environmental policy. Biden will do more damage to any particular field. Not every, but many of them. Biden will do more damage. I always acknowledge that. Long term, we still are screwed, probably. But the only hope we had was to defeat Trump. Now, I also said that to really have hope, we need to defeat him by a big margin. He has to be clobbered. That didn't work. So we're screwed. What can I say? Politically, we're screwed. Michael says, if collectivist systems are by nature incompetent, how were the Soviets able to be the first to launch satellites and human beings into space, although no other communist country was able to do it? Because a lot of the technology they had, they stole through spying from the US. A lot of the technology they had, they got from the Germans. The scientists that they captured at the end of World War II. In a sense, we did too, but less so. But the Soviets, a lot of their scientists were German. And in a particular, on a particular area, in a very narrow field, when you have some people who are super smart and super able, they can achieve narrow success. Narrow success. Jura says the AK-47 was based on a German rifle. Could be, I don't know. AK-47 was a good rifle, so there could be particulars where they're decent at, but it has to be particulars and it's very narrow. Okay, Michael, what do you make of Arnold Schwarzenegger's "screw freedom" comment? It's what little freedom we have left that allowed him to accomplish what he has. I haven't respected Schwarzenegger since he became president. Since he became governor of California. And when he did, he started out with a kind of free market agenda. He called Milton Friedman and asked him to become an advisor to him. And then it was all downhill from there. He basically, as soon as he got a little opposition, he became a Kennedy. He became his wife, and he governed as a leftist. Schwarzenegger, like so many, is a complete pragmatist. And complete pragmatists are going to say, screw freedom. If freedom they view as a barrier to achieving a particular goal that they have. For example, right now, I don't know, crushing COVID. Okay, when your kids were growing up, how did you deal with bullies and obnoxious parents? I told them to stand up to bullies, and I stood up to the obnoxious parents. I don't believe it's your job to protect your kids from bullies. Their job is to protect themselves from bullies. I don't think they were bullied, though, so they went to schools where I don't think they were bullied. But I never ran to my parents to protect me from bullies. I got beaten up, and the school often invited my parents to come in because I fought back. But, and my parents said, don't do that again, and I went and did it again. Right? So I think that's what is necessary. Now, granted, if there's really an evil, horrific, and it depends on your kid and everything, but generally, you need to teach your kids to have some backbone. Dave says, despite of the decay of the West, I think there's still enough reason and freedom out there for people to achieve at least a semblance of happiness, but maybe it's in part, it's too far gone. I certainly think for us, there's enough freedom out there to achieve our personal happiness. But it's becoming harder and harder for a lot of people, and it's going to get harder and harder. But again, my whole theme is, and this is the point I think David made earlier, objectivism is to teach you how to live, and there's still a lot of living to be done, even with the political environment we have today. A lot of living to be done. Embrace life. Bradola says, if low self-esteem stops one starting a new business, is it wise to start it even though one's worked to cover all possible known bases? Will starting creative work increase self-esteem? Yes. Challenge yourself. One of the ways to overcome low self-esteem is to challenge yourself, prove to yourself that you're successful, have pride in your successes, and push forward. So, you know, you've got to work on the self-esteem. And the only way really to increase your self-esteem is to challenge yourself and be successful. Henry, you're on. Have you considered inviting Dave Hammond onto the show to discuss physics and philosophy? Logical Leap is one of my favorite books. No, I mean, years ago I would have, not anymore. Basically, Dave Hammond stabbed me, Leonard Peikoff, in the back and has been spending the last year or so attacking me for no good reason that I can tell, the last 6 months at least. So no, Logical Leap is a important book, but primarily an important book because of what Leonard Peikoff brought to it, which is the solution to the problem of induction. But it's worth reading because it's a pretty important issue. James asked, what do you think will cause the real estate market to crash in America versus the crash to China? Both seem over leveraged. Do you think governments will track international wealth more closely now? Yes, I think generally they're going to try to track international wealth more closely. It's why they want electronic money. They don't want cash. It's why they want control over crypto. They want to regulate crypto so they can control all that. China and the US are very different here. The US has an undersupply of real estate. At least at the residential level, we don't have enough real estate. And that's part of the reason why prices are going up. It's a supply and demand mismatch. China has too much real estate in at least certain places. Exactly what causes these markets, if they will crash, to crash, is hard to tell. But certainly with inflation, real estate prices are likely to go up, not down. What could cause them to crash is a dramatic recession, a recession where people really don't have the money to pay rent, and the government can't anymore bail them out for a variety of reasons, because they can't issue debt, because the debt markets are frozen up and people don't trust the American government. So it's a confluence of events where one of the phenomena, one of the manifestations will be the real estate market crashes. Okay, I think this will be the last question. Ian Mickett asks, think the US could go full authoritarian within the next 10 to 20 years? You have a contingent plan for such a scenario? Yes, I think it could go in 20 years, probably not 10, but 20, with the right circumstances, maybe 10. I don't know how likely it is, but I think it is possible. I used to think it was 50. Trump has convinced me it could be a lot less. And it's not Trump. It's the kind of support Trump got that's convinced me. It's not Trump himself. It could be less. What's my contingency plan? I don't really have one. Because when the US goes, where can you escape to? Maybe then I'll advocate for Puerto Rican independence. We will see. And James asks, Canada is looking to implement a wealth tax like the US. US is not going to have a wealth tax. What is the purpose of wealth when it's always confiscated? Why does real estate have property taxes no matter the country? Do you ever own it? It goes back to the idea that land and building and property is passive income. You don't actually earn anything. That's why it's easy to tax it. You don't want to tax productive ability. Owning land and owning property is not productive. So we put a property tax on it because it's not productive that you own it. It has a long history, property taxes do. We don't have a wealth tax in the US. Other than Elizabeth Warren, nobody's really advocating for a wealth tax right now. Biden is not. I don't think you'll see a wealth tax. I don't think it will pass Congress. It's very anti-American, and I don't think even the Democrats will pass it as we stand today. In the future, they will, and maybe even Republicans will, because they'll have to pay off the debt somehow, and they'll realize there's very little left to tax but these kind of things. Okay, David, Jennifer, Matt, thank you. Really appreciate you joining me today. Really appreciate the support. Thanks everybody who was listening today, participated, super chats, the chat. Don't forget to like the show before you leave. Press that like button if you liked it. A couple of people obviously didn't. And I always try to remember, what did I say that people didn't like? But I mentioned Trump, so that's enough. And then Don't forget to like, share, and if you want to support the show, support it on a monthly basis. And that is on Patreon, Subscribestar, and YuronBookShow.com/support. Thanks, everybody. I will see you tomorrow at 8 p.m. We'll have a show tomorrow at 8 p.m. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, Yaron.